Thank you for downloading another episode of Your Life Simplified. My name is Brian Leitner, and I'll be the host of this episode. At Merit Wealth Advisors, we serve as advocates for clients, helping clients through the best of times, like helping put their kids through school, providing them a retirement plan, tax strategies, and things of that nature. On the other end of the spectrum, we also help clients and support them through perhaps some of the most challenging times in their lives. Divorce may be one of these challenging times. For many, it is a very unpleasant experience for everyone involved. But working with the right advisor can make all the difference in the world. Someone who understands emotionally what that individual is going through, as well as the financial implications of doing so. So our guest today is Megan Brozowski, who's a senior wealth advisor with Merit Wealth Advisors, and she's carved out a specialized practice in this area, helping those that are going through this process, helping individuals navigate divorce. Megan is a certified financial planner, and she also has a designation which is called the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst designation, which makes her uniquely qualified to speak on this topic. So Megan, thanks again for coming on to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian.
Megan, can you take maybe a minute or two and discuss with us your background and your focus as it relates to divorce within your client base?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. I've been doing financial planning for almost 20 years, and while I was studying to get my certified financial planner designation, my mother and father were going through a divorce. So during that time, I was learning all about the CFP and said, you know what, my mom, who does not have much of a financial background, she is really stuck right now, and I want to help her through this budgeting process, help her kind of get through this. And then found out that there was a designation, the CDFA. So I decided to, once I passed the CFP, a couple of years later, I also got the CDFA.
So Megan, it sounds like you got this designation based on personal experience and what you saw your mom and dad going through this process. So I think that's probably one of the ways in which we learn best, and obviously that's why you have a passion for it.
No, I was going to say you're right, Brian. Having lived, through a divorce with my own family and seeing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. My parents are both happily remarried, and did take them a couple of years to go through this, but it helps me to relate to other clients that are in that beginning point and don't even know where to start, where to go, or where they're going to end up.
I'm sure that there are a good handful of individuals that are listening to this podcast now that have never heard of this Certified Divorce Financial Analyst designation. And I think a lot of us think about, attorneys, divorce attorneys, because this is what they specialize in, of course. So can you discuss maybe some of the differences and when somebody might want to be involved with a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst and how that maybe complements the relationship with an attorney?
Sure. So it is a growing designation in the U.S. and Canada. There are over 5,000 individuals that have this designation. So, more people are hearing about it. But when going through the divorce process, there's a lot of financial planning, but it's working with an attorney to understand what alimony is, how a client needs to fill out their case information statement. And then once those numbers are there, I help them to plan for, what things are going to look like, not just next year, but 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, after everything's, after everyone's been divorced and all the assets have been split, and see what financially, they are going to look like on their own.
So Megan, obviously when people get divorced, there's a lot going on, whether it's, the emotional aspect of it, the financial aspect of it, but you bring up a great point. The attorney is qualified to do what they do from the legal perspective, but a lot of this, as it relates to finances, and if they were, a joint couple, and maybe they were both working, maybe one wasn't working, now that they're splitting, I would imagine the financial aspect of what happens next is huge.
You're right, Brian, and it all depends on who's initiating the divorce. I rarely see where both people decide that, okay, it's time to, go our separate ways. Usually one isn't aware of the situation. So that person that has been told, I'm leaving you, really is in a much greater kind of emotional state of mind. And then once they say, oh my goodness, my spouse is leaving me, then all of this paperwork needs to be filled out and figuring out your budget and a lot of the, the legal work, and someone gets, pretty much lost in their tracks. So what I can help them to do is, there's a lot of hand holding and, really just listening to someone who's at that point, that's, just again, kind of blindsided by this, and then saying, okay, I know you're kind of stuck where you are now, but let me help you transition, at least the financial piece of, okay, when you and your husband are, or you and your wife are split, this is what it's going to look like when you are on your own. And it takes them a while to grasp that, because they're so used to being married to someone, and there's, the emotional aspect of now being on your own. And then, it's the financial piece of, oh my goodness, am I going to be okay? Can I afford to get divorced? So it's a lot of emotion that goes through it, but helping them to at least see the numbers piece. And the numbers, as I say, the numbers don't lie. It's okay if you spend this and you want to stay in your house, you may need to go back and get a job, or if you do want to stay in the house, you may need to cut your living expenses by $10,000 a year. And I think helping clients to at least start to understand the financial aspect of it helps them to also, with their emotional piece of, okay, this is what's going on, this is what I want to do, and I try to help them, figure out what it's going to look like, at least financially, at the end of the day.
You bring up a lot of great points. One of them is that one of the spouses, this is going to be a complete surprise to them, or it could be a complete surprise to them. And so they're overwhelmed from a variety of different perspectives on sort of what to do next. And so when I think about, what you do and how you come into play, what does a typical engagement look like? Because I would imagine, you can't work with both the spouses in this case, right? So you're generally working with one of those individuals. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. So I'll give, there's all kind of flavors of divorce situations. I have worked with a husband and wife that were going through mediation, and they just wanted me to help them to split their assets in the most tax efficient way. They were already, okay, we're getting divorced, we don't want to drag this out, how do we split our assets? And then on the flip side, I worked with a woman who was blindsided by her husband. He owned a business. She really knew nothing about finances. He used to just give her cash every week, so she didn't, checking account. I mean, it was really helping her learn from step one, and helping her to understand her budget, can she afford to stay in her house? And the big question of, if her husband sells his business, should she get a piece of that? And Brian, what was really interesting with that situation was, I had done probably 6 to 8 months worth of, just kind of that background work, saying, okay, here's, if you're spending, $20,000 a month and you get this amount of money, you'll be okay. And I was in the attorney's office. The husband and wife were mediating. So I was with the wife in one office, the husband was in the other office, and the mediator was coming back and forth and saying, okay, if I give you $10 million, today, is that going to work for you? And I was using planning software to kind of run the numbers, as we were going back and forth negotiating. So they come in all shapes and sizes for what the divorce situation is, but really it's to understand, where they are at that point and where they want to be. And even if they're not ready, they can't see what's going to happen next week. I help them to figure out, okay, yes, I understand that, but we really do need to, look at what things are going to look like, post-divorce.
And I think when you go through this process, I mean, you obviously we're simplifying it, saying, okay, this person could have $10 million. Is that going to be good enough? Right. There's a lot of different ramifications as it relates to assets that folks have when they go through a divorce, and how you split assets. So if you had an IRA or a 401k, that maybe all pre-tax money versus something that an asset that's already been taxed, I mean, there could be substantial differences there. So making sure that they have, someone like you to walk them through that process and make sure that it actually is going to be divided accordingly with that in mind from an after-tax basis, right?
Yes, that's correct. I had kind of one of my worst divorce situations where someone was referred to me after she had, signed on the dotted line, and in the divorce agreement it had said to split split the accounts 50-50, but it didn't specify the positions. It just said the dollar amount. So when I met with the wife after she had, been divorced, her assets had been split, I looked at her, what she had received, and she received the low cost basis positions while her ex-husband took all the high basis positions. So I had to tell her and she was 100% in equities, which was not her risk tolerance at all. So we had to go through the education process of, okay, if we do want to take some risk off the table, there is going to be some tax involved, and here's a potential tax bill, you may have to pay in April. And so that was probably one of the worst situations where I said, geez, I wish I would have been there earlier, so she would not have had to go through that.
Yeah, leaving her with all those gains to pay. Could we talk about maybe a different asset at the risk of getting too technical? How would 401ks work if you're going through that divorce process, and maybe they both have 401ks or 403bs, or maybe just one of the spouses does? How does splitting up that asset work? Because you have issues as it relates to, hey, we're not 59 and a half yet. Is there a penalty, taxes, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so as part of the divorce process, the attorney, once it's decided that the husband needs to split his 401k 50-50, the attorney will then file a qualified domestic relations order, or what is known as a quadro, which really is a form that tells the plan administrator, okay, we need to split out the 401k 50-50, and then once that's done, her portion will be rolled into an IRA that will avoid a 10% penalty or any possible ordinary income that may be due. If she did take that 401k amount and put it in her checking account, so it allows for a rollover to an IRA, so it can continue to be in a tax deferred account.
Thanks, Megan. Appreciate that detail. I guess not every asset is created equal, especially as it relates to divorce and splitting of assets. So it's great that there is this strategy that's in place that's employed by attorneys. It's also really important that you're working with the right attorney. I think we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we talked a little bit about it's almost having the right tool for the job. Well, there are a lot of different attorneys that practice in a lot of different areas, and so there are some intricacies as it relates to some of these strategies. So working with someone that specializes in divorce, if they're going through that process, can again make all the difference in the world. Thanks again for downloading this episode of Your Life Simplified, which is produced by Mariner Wealth Advisors. And at Mariner Wealth Advisors, we're here to serve as your advocate. We help people chart a course to reach their personal and financial goals so that they can have greater peace of mind that may lead to a more fulfilling life. We do this by always putting our clients first. Because as fiduciaries, we're required to provide guidance that's in the best interest of clients, not in the best interest of a company or shareholders or anyone else. So as you listen to this podcast and have questions about maybe your own financial situation, or would simply like a second opinion, or even you have an idea for a future podcast, please go ahead and email us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. If you found the information on this podcast valuable, please go ahead and share it with a friend or family member that you think might benefit from this information. And please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode. So outside of splitting the assets, something else that generally comes up would be Social Security. Can you talk a little bit about what happens as it relates to divorce with people's Social Security?
Sure. So what happens with Social Security is that as long as when someone goes through the divorce process, as long as someone has been married to that person for 10 years, the wife or husband is able to qualify on their ex-spouse's Social Security benefit. So let's use an example of the husband had worked his whole life. They decide to get divorced in their mid-50s. She does not have much of a Social Security benefit, but they were married for over 10 years. So once she's able to qualify for Social Security, she can claim half of his benefit still. So that does not go away. Even if even if her ex-husband remarries, she can still claim the benefit. So potentially he may have two two spouses claiming his Social Security benefit. But so that's one thing that people are always concerned with is I know I didn't work, I stayed home with the kids. I don't have much of a Social Security benefit, so I fear I'm going to lose that, and that's not true. As long as they've been married for 10 years, they can still qualify on their ex-spouse's benefit.
In that example, the spouse did not remarry, so he or she collected on that individual's, on her ex's benefit. But if that individual did remarry, does that change things?
Yeah, so if the ex-wife was claiming on her ex-spouse's benefit, and then all of a sudden she remarries, she would lose her ex-spouse's benefit and go to her new spouse's benefit. So she would lose that.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So Megan, this detail is terrific. I know that there are certain people that are really interested in this, and at the same time, I don't want to bore people. But as it relates to alimony, that's a tricky area of tax. I know there's been some changes in that area too. Would you talk a little bit about how alimony now works from a tax perspective?
Sure. So prior to the Tax and Jobs Acts of 2017, the payor was able to deduct any alimony on their income tax return. And the receiver of the alimony, they had to report it as taxable income. Now since that act has been passed, that is no longer, so it cannot be deducted, and alimony is not considered taxable income on the receiver's side.
Okay, so that's a game changer, certainly as it relates to getting a divorce and the financial aspects of that.
Yep. Yes, it has been. I know prior to the Tax Act passing, a lot of the divorce attorneys were very busy because they wanted to get the agreements signed, sealed, and delivered before it was in effect.
So Megan, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year that referred to a significant increase in those that are 50 or older that are getting divorced. And they're actually referring to this as gray divorce. So if you look at the numbers, back in 1990, 1 in 10 divorces were with people that were either 50 or older. Today, it's 1 in 4. Do you have any thoughts on why we've seen this jump and what those implications might be?
Sure. So it's interesting with this question because that is when my parents got divorced when they were 50, I think 55 and 54. So they fell right into that spectrum. But I think part of what happened with them is, and similar situations where the kids were off in college. It was time that, okay, now that it's just me and my husband or me and my wife, do I want to spend the rest of my life with them? So I see for a lot of clients a trigger of the kids going to college or some other they're moving for some reason. So for another example, I have a client that she actually initiated the divorce. She said, you know what, I've put up with my husband for all these years. She is in her late 50s. She said, my kids are all in college now. It's time. I just need to get away from him. So she came in and said, this is, here's the situation. So that's kind of a trigger, it seems like, for a lot of people that, I've been married for, 15, 20, 25 years. Is this the person that I want to be with for the rest of my life?
Thanks, Megan. That also correlates to the fact that maybe, a lot of us are living longer, and that's a trend that's going to continue. So, it sounds like in this area, it may continue. So it sounds like within this demographic that may be expected to continue. The other thing that I think is interesting as you think about it is, years ago, there were a lot of people that were getting married a whole lot younger than they are today. And so, maybe they made some quick decisions and a lot of those marriages, didn't work out within the first couple of years. And so, again, from a statistics perspective, seeing this shift sort of makes sense when you look at all the trends that are in place, if you will. So Megan, as we begin to wrap up, what tips might you have if there's a listener that's out there, maybe they know someone that's going through a divorce, they're going through a divorce, or they know that this is on the horizon, as it relates to having a team in place to support them or their loved ones. What are some of your thoughts on things that they could be doing?
Yeah, sure. So I think part of, whether they're contemplating or they have a friend that's contemplating, at times it's, a starting point of, can I do this? Am I going to be okay? And what I tell clients is, whatever stage they're in, it's okay. You're going to get through it. It might take you 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on how vicious the divorce may or may not be, but you will be in a much better spot when this is done. And part of building a team, part of my role is to listen and help the person going through the divorce, help them to, okay, what are your goals, post-divorce? Where do you see yourself? And even if they have no idea, we can talk about it to get an idea, say, okay, yes, do you want to stay in the house? Do you want to move? And kind of help them think what life is going to be like when it's just them and not, Mr. and Mrs. So as part of going through that and the financial piece, I always ask or recommend for someone to go talk to a therapist. I mean, that's part of when you're going through such a traumatic life change or life event. It makes sense to go to talk to someone that is professionally trained and can help someone in this area. Things like, how are we going to tell the kids? Should I change my name back? All these emotional issues that, I can listen to someone, but and I can run the numbers on what they want to do, but it really makes sense to go talk to someone that's trained to help, the divorcee in this area.
I think that's an excellent point, and I don't know that many people would consider that, right? They're so focused on dealing with the emotional issues, but seeking counsel from a professional from that perspective makes a lot of sense, and obviously complements the conversations and work that they'll do with an attorney or someone with your background. So thank you. Megan, I want to thank you for coming on the show. But before we let you go, there's a question that we ask all of our guests. And that question is, what is the worst financial decision you've ever made?
So I was thinking about this, and it was my first year out of college. I was living in New York City and was actually saving money. I don't know how, but I was. When my company offered 401k, and for some reason I just never rolled into I never elected to be in the 401k, and the company had a match. So, and I was asking my dad about it. This is before I was getting into financial planning. And he said, oh, you're not going to save much. Don't worry about it. I think he just wanted me to have fun in the city. So now I'm kicking myself doing that. So
thanks, Dad. So let me pour a little salt in the wound. Have you ever gone back and thought about how much money you would have contributed if you had, and what that growth rate would have been over the past several years?
Yeah, I haven't. But what I did do was my sister, I made up for my loss. I helped my sister. I made her enroll in her own 401k when she moved to the city 3 years later. So.
Well, great job. I appreciate you sharing. I appreciate your expertise and appreciate your time today. So, Megan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So everyone, thanks for listening to the show today. If you have questions, ideas, comments for the show, please go ahead and email them in at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. Thanks again for listening.
Mariner LLC, doing business as Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC registered investment advisor. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which a notice has been filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.